What's up, guys? Welcome back. Whole nine yards here on a Thursday evening, 7:06 Eastern. Brandon, how's it going?
It's going good. I don't know. Nothing. I haven't really been doing anything the last couple days, so nothing really on my end. How about you?
Stuff's going pretty well. I guess we'll just get right into what's happened recently. News as of probably the past 2 hours, 3 hours happened. Rick Carlisle resigned from the Mavericks. Uh, I'm not sure if it's if he's actually resigning or if it was a resign so we don't have to fire you. I think he actually resigned. I think he had 2 years left on his contract. And I guess I don't know if it was the whole Luca versus the front office thing that shook him or what it was particularly, but it seems like he just didn't want to coach there anymore. Interesting. It really is interesting. He coached there for 13 years, led Dallas to a title. So it was kind of shocking to me just because I think he was kind of viewed as a top 10 coach, probably from most people, if not higher. Just taking the Dallas organization with relatively little talent other than Nowitzki and Doncic and making them a very respectable organization. Interesting. I think more details should come out eventually. Uh, Carlisle said it was solely his decision and a statement released to ESPN. So probably not actually, resign or we're going to fire you thing. I don't know the reasoning. I don't know the reasoning. But what's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely not firing of any sort. Definitely not. I mean, he's one of the better coaches in the league. I think he's like a top 10 coach. So definitely not a firing. And you can't really blame him for this season, anyways. I mean, they underperformed at the beginning, but I don't really blame that on the coaching. I kind of blame that on the roster that was built, which he has no effect on. And then also Luca being out of shape. And then when they did get playing well, then Porzingis, gets injured again. He's not playing well. So I think there was a lot of factors that kind of derailed this season. And again, you had a chance. You were up 3-2 in the first round. And the rest of the team just didn't show up in those last two games. So again, I don't really blame that on coaching. So I don't think it was a firing of any sort. I do think it was a resign from Rick Carlisle, who again I really like him as a coach. I think he really is one of the top coaches in the NBA. Pretty underrated, honestly, because he's just been there for so long. I think 13 years he's been with the Mavs. He was with the Pistons before. Right out, during those like championship kind of runs, like right towards the end. So he's been in the league a long time. He's been coaching for a long time. Whatever team does get him, assuming that he would go straight to another team as a head coach, not a front office role or maybe a year off or an assistant coach. Assuming he does go to another team, being a head coach, whatever team that is, I think that's an amazing hire. I could definitely see the Celtics as possibly getting Rick Carlisle. That they does have some connections there, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's maybe where they go with a coach like that. If I was you, I'd be happy if they did get him. But with whatever team does get him, though, that's a great hire. It's probably the best hire of the offseason, but he's definitely the best candidate out there. So yeah, again, whatever team gets him, I think it's the best hire of the offseason.
Yeah, I'm gonna be happy if they hire Carlisle. Not because I do like Carlisle. I think he's a top 10 coach, but he is just so much better than whoever else they're probably gonna hire out of at least known candidates. Like, would I rather have him or like a Chauncey Billups or that's not even a discussion to me. It's not a debate. Would I rather have him or like a Terry Stotts or, you know, one of these other retreads that just isn't just very it's not very good, not very prudent. Carlisle's probably the best option. It's really not close. I don't know where Carlisle wants to go. If I
Yeah,
had to guess, I mean, why do you know, or do you think you know why he left?
I mean, I would say, they did part ways with their GM the day before, so yesterday, Donnie Nelson. So maybe that had an effect on it. I mean, Donnie Nelson's been there for a long time as well. I think they almost came up at the same time at the Mavs when they both got the GM and head coach. I think Donnie Nelson was there a couple years before, so maybe that had an effect on it. Maybe they were talking about other GMs coming in or other guys, other voices, and maybe just didn't like that because obviously, like you said, he had 2 years on his contract, so it's kind of weird for him just to leave. But maybe there was just something. I wouldn't say it's a Luka problem. I really wouldn't. I mean, maybe it is because he just doesn't. He actually wants to run a real offense because I think we can all see that the offense that they run is basically James Harden what the Rockets did. It's not really like true basketball. And Rick Carlisle is a very good offensive coach, as you saw with like Dirk. In like those late 2000s, early 2010s, like they were moving the ball. They were shooting threes at a time when teams didn't really shoot threes like that. But they were moving the ball really well. That was the kind of their offense. Now their offense is very ISO based. So maybe he just didn't like that. So maybe that's why he left. I guess we'll know, as reports come out in the next couple of days and weeks. But I wouldn't say it's like a him versus Luka thing. I think if anything, if it has to do anything with basketball wise, I would say maybe just didn't like running that offense, which I think makes sense, honestly. I mean, it's not fun probably, running that offense all the time. So if you go to like a Celtics team where they kind of do like passing the ball, I know you have Tatum, but it is more of a passing team. I think that'd be more fun to coach in, I would say, than having one guy control the ball for 40% of the time.
There has to be something going on behind the scenes. I don't think Carlisle left solely because he doesn't like the offensive scheme with Luca there because he is the head coach after all. Yeah, I mean, you kind of almost have to kind of run what you do, but you also don't at the same time. I mean, we saw what happened to James Harden once he left the Rockets. He didn't have to run that style of offense. And yeah, that might have been the best thing for the Rockets at the time when you have not much offensive talent, at least, ball handling and shooting around you. But I don't think that's what they had to run, at least, for the future. I don't think they had to run a James Harden style offense, if you want to call it that. Um, I think it had to be something to do with the changes being made, whether it be a GM or the rest of the front office or Luca's stance on, who he, because I think Luca probably, like a lot of NBA stars at this point, likes to have power in the organization and wants to have a say. I think Carlisle had a problem with whether it be Luca having a say in something over him or the owner having say more than him or the moves being made, at least whether it's the GM being, the GM not being there or something like that. I don't think it has to do with strictly basketball things. I think there is something behind the scenes that we don't know yet that maybe we'll never know or maybe we'll know soon. I just have a tough time believing that Carlisle is leaving the Mavericks after 13 years because he doesn't like Luca. Because Luca, I mean, not that he doesn't like Luca, but like he doesn't like the scheme because he is a head coach. He's an offensive guy. And I think he had the respect and the authority in the Dallas organization to do whatever he wanted and not be, not have the repercussions, at least, on the court, but off the court. Maybe he didn't have that. I don't know. It's interesting though. As far as where he could go, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think Boston's a good place for him. He could probably go wherever he wants to at this point. That has an opening position, I would assume. If he wanted to go to Portland, I don't see why he wouldn't be able to go to Portland. If he wanted to go to New Orleans, I don't see why he wouldn't be able to go there. I think most organizations would probably hire him over pretty much anybody else. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong because Carlisle's 61 and maybe a team wants a younger coach to go with, to pair with a Tatum or to pair with a Williamson. But yeah, I think whatever team gets him is lucky because the other teams are going to be hiring Chauncey Billups, and not that Billups is a bad coach, but just people not as proven. You're taking gambles, and more than likely you're going to get a Jason Kidd, who not a bad, horrible head coach, but certainly not a great one either.
Yeah, and speaking of the Pelicans, I think we should honestly start talking about yesterday, as in Wednesday, June 16th. And we can go in order, honestly, because Wednesday was kind of like, it was almost like Black Monday in the NFL, when obviously after that week 17 games, now it'll be week 18, I guess. You have your coaches who are fired at the end of the season, usually the day after that last game. So that's kind of what yesterday was, even though it's the middle of the playoffs. But again, a lot of these, I think basically every single one of these teams missed the playoffs, except for obviously the Mavericks. But that was a different situation. And then we'll talk about the last one that happened yesterday when we get to it. But it started with the Pelicans, at least yesterday, with Stan Van Gundy, who's out after 1 year. I mean, pretty obvious, honestly. We never, I guess, talked about it, but when he was hired, just a terrible hiring. I think anyone saw that. It was a team that was young. has talent clearly in Zion and Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball even. So they had talent. They had potential last year. No one thought they'd ever make the playoffs last year. They were competing all the way to the end. The expectations were a lot higher this year with the healthy Zion. A more improved Ingram, a much better Lonzo. If you would have got Lonzo, if you would have expected what you got from Lonzo this year, you'd probably think you're making the playoffs, honestly. Especially with the way Zion played, the way Brandon Ingram played. So just a very disappointing season. They went 31-41. Their defense, I don't know if it was dead last. I think the Wizards were dead last, but it was at least 29th or 28th. And they blew so many leads at so many points during the season. They just had too much talent they had so much talent on that team for the team to win 31 games. I know it's in the West, but they were one of the worst teams in the West all season. And that's saying something when you're at the Timberwolves, the Thunder, and the Rockets. So just not a good hiring. Clearly a mistake. That's why he's gone after 1 year. That's what happens. So it looks like they're going to look at the same people they looked at last year who weren't hired, which is a couple of assistants like Jock Vaughn, who took his interim for the Nets when Kenny Atkinson got fired last season. Jason Kidd is in there possibly. So we'll see what way they go. But whoever that head coach is, they honestly do have to get it right because there were some reports earlier today that Zion, his family wasn't happy with the situation in New Orleans. Now who knows, if he's even thinking that. Maybe it's just a family, exclusively his family saying that. So who even really knows about that report? But it's at least something that came out today. So this head coach really has to be right and fit with this team and fit for Zion. Because Zion is going to be one of the best players in the league, if not in the next 2 years. So this is going to be a very, very big hire for an organization that really hasn't had, I think their best head coach is probably Monty Williams, in that late 2000s with Chris Paul. But again, that's late 2000s. That's over a decade ago. So you really got to hit the nail on the head here with a really good coach. And, again, you're probably not getting Rick Carlisle. So we'll see what, Jason Kidd, is he the right option there? I don't really know. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know who they're going to be able to hire. If it's not Carlisle, then I guess you have to consider a kid. I mean, I'd prefer like a Kenny Atkinson over a Jason Kidd if that's what was given to me. I think Atkinson's a good guy there. I just think that what he did with the Nets when they had little talent. I'm not saying the Pelicans are similar to that, but Zion's not. He's not like a Doncic. He's not a ball dominant guy at all. They don't really have necessarily like a super ball dominant guy. Kind of almost similar to, I guess, the Nets in a way, although they did have D'Angelo Russell. I think Atkinson would fit well with this team. I don't think he would fit well with like the current Nets, which is obviously Kyrie, Harden, and Durant. Other than that, I don't know. I mean, as a Billups in play, I'm not. I don't know. I have no idea. College guys. Again, I'm not gonna. I have no clue. So who knows? I think we more just. I more just kind of have to react to when the hiring's made, if I like it or not. I just don't know. I just don't know who they're gonna hire. Obviously, I would agree that Van Gundy's probably a bad head coach. Definitely a bad head coach. He probably had maybe a couple good years in Orlando, but those teams were talented. I mean, obviously had Prime Howard, Jameer Nelson, Turkoglu. Yeah, I think Van Gundy struggled with playing the right people. I think Kyra Lewis probably should have played more. I would have liked to see the young guys play more. Jackson Hayes didn't play that well or play that much, although he didn't play very well, but I still would have liked, if you're not going to make the playoffs, I'd like to see him play a little bit more. JJ Redick probably doesn't need to be on this team anymore.
Well, he wasn't.
Yeah, but he played 18 and a half minutes per game when he was. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens. Who is Brandon Ingram a number 2? Is Ball going to be on the team? Is Bledsoe a good fit? Steven Adams is regressing. He has a large contract. You're probably not going to be able to get rid of him. He's probably stuck there. We'll see what happens. The Cleveland guy is still the GM, I want to say, for David Griffin. We'll see what he does. We'll see what happens. If Zion's unhappy, that's obviously horrible because that's your only hope really at being a good small market team. If you want to call New Orleans a small market team, that's kind of your only hope. because you're not going to get free agents, obviously. So we'll see what happens. But I mean, clearly firing him was a good move. Just like York Grin, or however, I don't even know how you pronounce it, but
Nate Bajorkin. Bajorkin. I don't know. Who cares? He's not a head coach anymore, so we don't have to say it. But moving on from the Pelicans, though, the next head coach that was fired, again, speaking of yesterday, I guess technically not fired because they never came to a contract resolution, but it was Scott Brooks, the Wizards. And I said this, I think it was maybe the last episode, maybe even the one before that, that there was strong reports that he was going to come back as their head coach, which would have been very surprising for a lot of people. And it did seem like he was coming back because they just failed to come to a new contract agreement. So it's not like they dismissed him, not even looking for a contract. They did try to get a contract with him. I'm assuming they went for a shorter term deal. For I think Westbrook has 2 years and then Beal has 1 year left, but they obviously could extend him if they want to. So they're probably going for like a 2 year contract. And he probably wanted like a 4 or 5 year contract. So that's probably where the disagreement was. I haven't seen a report on that, but that's what I can guess. But he's out as head coach there. Obviously, he wasn't the most successful. He's really not that good of a head coach, honestly. So it was kind of surprising he was there for 5 years to begin with, considering their defense has been dead last the last 3 straight years. So they obviously needed a new coach in there. When you have a guy like Westbrook and Beal, again, assuming Beal stays, which it does seem like he's going to, I think you need a veteran voice. Again, the options aren't great for veteran head coaches, but I think you need a veteran voice and a guy who's really good with players like a Westbrook and a Beal, who obviously have a lot of authority and power over an organization. So I think the names that were being thrown out there was Wes Unseld Jr., who he's been an assistant for a while. Sam Cassell has been an assistant for multiple teams. Obviously, most known for Doc Rivers being an assistant for him. Obviously, being a pretty good NBA player. I think that'd be a pretty good fit. I think Kenny Atkinson was maybe even thrown out there. I don't think he'd work with that team, but maybe interesting. But definitely they're not a team that's going to win a championship. They're not a team that's probably going to make it past the second round. But I think it's Sam Cassell, Wes Unseld. Probably Wes Unseld's probably a pretty unknown name, but I think those are good hires if they were to go for them, and I think they probably will go for one of those two. But I guess what were your thoughts on Scott Brooks and the Wizards?
I think it's good. I think it's good he's gone. I mean, he's been an underwhelming head coach pretty much his entire career. I mean, you could argue that 2012 Thunder team not necessarily underachieved, but I mean that was his best head coaching performance, and it still wasn't great. I still think there are moments that you look at that team and you say, if you had a Popovich or somebody like that, they're probably winning that 2012 finals or at least doing better than they did. I think it went 6 or 5, 5 or 6.
It went 5. It went 5.
Yeah, we'll see who they hire. I don't know, but if I was the Wizards, I seriously consider trading Beal. I know they probably want to keep Beal. It's just a matter of does Beal want to stay with them, but I'm not a person who likes to, be that 6 seed and maybe win a round and maybe you go to the second round and lose to the 1 seed, or maybe you don't. So I don't like being that type of team. I know that some teams are perfectly content with that because you're going to sell tickets and you're going to be entertaining. Although you may never, actually be a serious competitor, that might be good enough. To me, I don't really like that because, I'm not an owner of a franchise. I'm not looking to make money. I'm looking to win. So I think you kind of have to blow it up for the Wizards. I don't know if you can. I mean, like, do people want to trade for Westbrook? I don't know. Probably not. He's big contract, but I mean, people definitely want Beal. You could probably get a lot for Beal. That's a good way to just reboot things, and you still have Westbrook, so you'd still be semi-competitive, especially in the East. We'll see how things turn out. I mean, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. So we'll see what they do with their head coaching situation, but that was it for head coaching yesterday. But again, there was a lot of other NBA news. So there's going to be, at least for right now, assuming no one else gets fired, which I think the only other possibility would be Mike Budenholzer if the Bucks lose, and we'll talk about that. They have a game tonight against the Nets, Game 6. We'll talk about that later, but that's probably the only other head coach that could possibly get fired. The teams that are remaining. So right now there's 7 openings going into the all season. Again, possibly 8, but we'll have to see what happens with the Bucks. But the bigger news, I should say, that came yesterday, And I'll start with the first one. Was that Chris Paul is going into the health and safety protocols, so we don't know exactly when he'll come back. I think they did say he tested positive for COVID-19, so I'm assuming I think it was 10 days or 14 days. I don't, and I think it depends. They kind of relax their rules a little bit, but I think it's 14 days. So we'll see what happens with them for the next series. The Clippers, I guess, we'll talk about that later, but they did win Game 5. So they are up 3-2 in that series. So if the Clippers do win Game 6, then that series would happen a lot sooner than you'd probably hope if you were a Suns fan, which means Chris Paul could possibly miss multiple games in that series, maybe even the whole series, depending on with the safety protocols and everything. But just huge news for a team that just swept the Nuggets, completely destroyed my pick of Nuggets in 6 or 7, whatever I said. And we're rolling. Clearly, they've been playing like the best team in the NBA so far in the playoffs, and that'd be a huge loss. You could say what you want about Paul. I think we both kind of agree on him in that he's good. He's really good, but I think he's a little overhyped. But still, that'd be a huge loss. You'd have to have Cameron Payne as your starting point guard. You lose a ball handler, a somewhat pretty good defender at this age in his career, a guy with leadership and a voice in that locker room. So it'd just be a huge loss. But again, we'll have to see what happens going to that next series and if he's able to play.
Huge blow for the Suns. I mean, we know the story arc. We know where they've come from. Huge blow. They're not going to beat either team if they don't have Paul for the whole series, for sure. If they miss him for more than a game, I don't like their odds. I really don't. Especially if it's the Clippers. If you don't have Chris Paul first off, the Clippers are a better team, in my opinion. And if you don't have Chris Paul for the first game and it's your home game, that is rough. I mean, to not have Chris Paul for the first game at home, you go down 0-1 most likely. And now you kind of have to win a game in LA, and that's rough. And who knows what Chris Paul looks like after COVID. We've seen numerous athletes in basketball, football, maybe not baseball, but we've seen athletes that just don't look the same after COVID. I mean, as a Pats fan, Cam Newton was one of those guys. Jason Tatum was one of those guys. Dennis Schroeder was one of those guys. You probably see more athletes look rough after COVID than look 100%. Just whether it's you're sick and you're just not conditioned after being, thrown out for 2 weeks or whatever, or not being in the groove or what it is. But I genuinely think it's probably over for the Suns. I think it would have been a tough competitive series, regardless of what team gets to the conference finals with the Suns. But who knows if Chris Paul makes it to game 1? If he does, cool. I think it'll be still pretty competitive, but I'd lean the other team. If not, I would pick the other team too. It's a huge blow because even if Chris Paul comes back, I'm not gonna, expect him to be 100% game 1, game 2, just because that's not what we've seen with athletes. I don't know what it is, but yeah, it's a rough blow for sure.
Yeah, I mean, even if he does come back in time for game 1, or even if he just misses game 1, it's going to be tough for them to win 4 games against whether it's the Clippers or even the Jazz. With him, it definitely has an effect on you. I mean, we saw it last year, kind of going through the bubble of some of the guys when they got it, in that 3 or 4 month layoff. But it's going to be, it'll be interesting to see what happens. If it happens sooner, if this game or this series ends in 6, if you even go 7, to give him a couple more days possibly. But it's going to affect him. I mean, he's 36 years old, obviously. It's going to have some effect on him, whether it's shooting wise or even just, you're just conditioning wise, endurance wise. So we'll see how many, minutes he plays when he comes back, how, the impact that he usually has compared to what he will have. So it's going to be a whole situation. If they lose, I know that's where the excuse will be. Not saying that it's like a bad excuse or anything, but that's where it will go. If they do lose, it's going to go to Chris Paul had this, and then he got put in the safety protocols, and that messed up everything that they had going. So you already know that's going to happen, but I guess we'll just have to wait for that to happen in the next 2 weeks or whatever when it does happen. But the breaking news right after that, it was almost simultaneously that it happened, was Kawhi Leonard is out for game 5, which happened last night. But he might have an ACL injury. You don't know if it's torn or not. That still hasn't even come out. I haven't even seen anything on it since yesterday, but they said it could be an ACL injury, which means he just could be out for the rest of the playoffs, even if they do win. And again, we'll talk about the Clippers game right after this, but um, just a huge blow if he is out for the rest of the playoffs, because even if they do win the series, I think they'd have some. I know we just talked about the Suns and Chris Paul, but I think that they'd have some trouble because a full going into the series knowing Kawhi is not going to play any of the games is a huge advantage for the Suns, even with Chris Paul having this COVID situation. It's just a top 5 player in the league who you just know is not going to be available for the series. So you can lock in on Paul George, who's been amazing the last couple games. You can lock in on some other guys on that team. You don't have to worry about Kawhi. So it's a huge blow if he's really going to be out for the rest of the playoffs. Again, still haven't really seen any official reporting on that since yesterday. So we'll see if that is true. But he did miss game 5. I think he'll be out for game 6. I mean, most definitely. And then if there's a game 7, he's most likely out for that too. So just a huge blow again. The Clippers team that looked like it's starting to get rolling. They got it from 2-0 to 2-2 again. Kawhi was the best player in games 3 and 4. He most likely would have been the best player in game 5 if he would have played. Just a time and a situation where you thought if the Clippers win this series with a healthy Kawhi, they have a real shot at winning the championship, especially with the injuries to the Nets. But now if he's going to be out, I mean, they have no shot at winning the NBA Finals.
Yeah, I was actually, it's a huge blow. If he's out for the whole playoffs and Chris Paul's out too, I mean, that clearly makes that series more competitive. Although I don't know. I mean, at that point, it's just who's healthier. Whoever's healthier wins, and that's not too exciting. But I will say, I think Kawhi being up for game 5 kind of proved my Paul George being the second best player in that series when he plays how he should play to be factual. I think he had a huge game, clearly. I mean, we can talk about it, but yeah, if Kawhi's out, I mean, that probably their title odds probably go with him. I would assume. Who knows? Because another thing I'm going to say is every team somehow is managing to get hurt. Over 50% of the teams. I mean, the only team that's healthy right now is the Bucks and the Hawks, probably that I can think of. I mean, Mitchell's hurt.
The Hawks have Hunter hurt, but yeah, they're more healthy than other teams, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, no, you're right.
But even still, I mean, every single team at least has 1 or 2 guys who are key to their team, even if it's not the star players like the Nets or the Clippers, I guess now, that are injured. So it's definitely a lot of teams.
Mitchell too. I mean, Mitchell clearly was not right game 5, especially in that one. He shot a 3-pointer and just basically limps down the court. I don't know. We'll see. I don't know. I mean, if he's healthy, do they win game 5? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. We'll have to see. At this point in the Western Conference, you could argue it's just whoever's healthier is going to win, and that's probably what happens. I don't know who is healthiest. Probably the Clippers, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know. If Chris Paul can make it back in time to not miss too many games, then probably the Suns. Who knows how long Mitchell's not going to be 100%. He's had that injury in the regular season too. He had that injury. He missed game 1. We'll see.
Yeah, we are going to see. And now we can actually get into that game 5 that happened last night with the Clippers and the Jazz. Like we said, no Kawhi in that game. It was Paul George. He was amazing. I think he had 37 points, 16 rebounds, 5 assists. He shot the ball pretty well. He was the reason that they won that game. They won 119-111. The Jazz started off really hot. I mean, to get Bogdan Bogdanovic had 32 points. So if you were to tell me that Bogdanovic, I know he does score points, but he's been struggling, I'd say, in the playoffs so far. If you were to tell me he's going to get 32 points and you're going to lose that game with no Kawhi, I think you'd be pretty surprised if you were a Jazz fan. Considering the way Mitchell's been playing, I know he clearly has some type of injury. Just the last couple of games, he's not been the same player he was in game 1 and 2. But even still, they made 23s and lost the game. I mean, that's pretty hard to do. And they shot 37%. I mean, that's a pretty decent percentage when you're making 23s. So just a very weird game, I'd say, in the sense that the stats kind of would indicate that the Jazz would have won this game. But The Clippers were the ones who did win. Marcus Morris was great again. If they're going to get performances like that from him, throughout the playoffs, I guess if they do win this series, they definitely have a shot at least getting to the finals. Maybe in the finals he can get hot in a couple games. It's obviously a long way away, but if Paul George is going to play like this and not play like he's been playing in the last couple playoff series, couple playoff seasons for him. This is the Paul George that we kind of expect. This is the guy who was supposed to be there before that broken leg, and clearly that derailed his career in some way. I know he's bounced back. He's still a really good player, all-star type player, but he wasn't the guy he was before that, and the guy he was supposed to be before that broken leg. And the last couple of games, he's shown that he could still be that guy. Now we'll have to see what happens in this game 6, because now the attention's really going to be on him in a closeout game on your home court. But speaking about game 5, it was just a great victory for the Clippers, and they're one game away from getting to the Western Conference Finals.
This team is still so confusing to me. There's almost no pattern really. But I mean, I'm here for it. I'm here to see how they play. I don't even know who I'm rooting for, to be honest. I typically have a team that I kind of prefer, that when my actual team's not in it. I don't even know who I want to win, come out of the Western Conference. We'll see what happens. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and one thing that is, I guess, surprising for this Jazz team is that their bench just has given them nothing. I mean, besides from Clarkson, who really hasn't been great all series, but he's at least going to give you some points, and he's going to play. I mean, the rest of their bench, 9 minutes, 6 minutes, 4 minutes, and they were combined just 1 for 2, with 2 of them not even taking any shots in the game. So you can't, and I know, like, they still only lost by 8 somehow. Like I was saying, the stats kind of would indicate that they would have won this game, but to get absolutely zero production from your bench, and again, Clarkson only had 15. He was 4-9 from 3, but 5-12 from the field. You just have to get better contributions from your bench. And this was a team that kind of relied a little bit on their bench in the regular season, and it just shows how big of an injury that Mike Conley injury was, because that would have lengthen your rotation. He's in your starting lineup. You can put Ingles off the bench. So you have Ingles and Clarkson off the bench. Now you have Ingles in the starting lineup. So he's going to have to be playing that, not coming off the bench. Another guy's going to have to step up, and clearly they're not stepping up. So that Mike Conley injury is really looming large over them. And that's something that people probably didn't think was going to be this big of a deal, but it clearly is.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. You're right. I kind of downplayed the injury, probably slightly more than definitely slightly more than you did. I think it's proven to be pretty significant. Clearly not as big as whatever Donovan Mitchell's dealing with, just because Mitchell's the best player on that team and they need him to win games. I mean, in the playoffs in general, benches play less than they do in the regular season for obvious reasons, because it's playoffs. But yeah, Utah relies on team basketball. Obviously, with Mitchell being hurt, that's unfortunate, but they do rely more so than the Clippers and the Suns and the Nets on having team basketball that doesn't revolve around your best player. And when Clarkson isn't able to deliver that well, when Ingles, if he doesn't hit shots, if Royce O'Neal doesn't play well, it can kind of start to crumble all around you. And we'll see how game 6 goes. I'm excited for it, but yeah.
What do you got for game 6?
I'm pretty much, I think my takes are just going to be whoever looks healthier. If Kawhi Leonard plays, which I don't think he will, then I lean Jazz. But at the same time, Mitchell's probably going to play. But if he looks injured, then I lean Clippers again. So if you're telling me to pick based off what I know, I go Clippers. I don't think Mitchell's right. I think he looks horrible in game 6. Not because he's a bad player, obviously, but because I think he's going to look really injured. I think the Clippers minus Kawhi Leonard are healthy. I think Paul George is healthy. I think he'll be the best player in game 6. I think they'll win. I think George will go for 30, 10, and 5. Probably just a lesser game than what he had for game 5, but still great. I think Morris will continue to shoot well. I think he's a solid 3-point shooter. He always has. Well, he has been ever since he left the Celtics, pretty much. I think he'll play well. I think they'll advance to the Western Conference Finals, which puts pressure on the Suns. means Chris Paul has to come back sooner rather than later. I don't think he can control it, but it sets up for an exciting Western Conference Finals. I hope Kawhi and Chris Paul can come back fully healthy for Game 1. I don't want to watch a game that's, if Chris Paul plays and he's healthy, then the Suns win. But if Kawhi Leonard plays and he's healthy, then the Clippers win. To me, that's just, nobody wants to see a battle of whoever's healthier.
Yeah, and I did look it up, and it said it's 10 days from your first positive test. So I'm assuming that is counted as yesterday. That's when the test came in. I'm going to assume. So that would put him at June 16th. 10 days from then would be what's that? June 27th. So they better hope that series goes to Game 7, because that'd give them at least to, like, I think the 22nd or 23rd until Game 1 would start. So at least that gives you a little bit more time. But I think anyways, he's gonna miss, I think, the first couple games of the series. I don't think there's any way he doesn't, especially because he tested positive. There's a 10-day wait. I think there's even another day or two that you have to wait again. So he's going to be out of shape. A week and a half away from basketball does get you out of shape, even for the best athletes in the world. And again, he's probably going to miss the first at least 2 games, I would imagine. So that series should go really bad for the Suns in the worst way possible. I mean, a way that 2 years ago no one could have ever expected that a disease could keep someone out of a Western Conference Finals game or anything like that. So just crazy things that we'll have to see if it does happen or not. But the other game last night, the first game, was I think it was probably the craziest game of the playoffs. Maybe the Bucks Nets game, Game 5, was a crazy game too, but this would maybe been even crazier. I mean, I was watching this game, I think probably from like the middle of the second quarter on, and I just couldn't watch the beginning of it because I just wasn't in front of the TV. But then I started watching. I remember after halftime, probably halfway through the third quarter, I was honestly just going to stop watching because I thought the game was just over. I mean, they're up 20 plus the entire game. There was never a chance of the Hawks coming back from when you were watching it live. They couldn't make any shots. They couldn't get any stops. They kept turning the ball over. They kept fouling. Just anything. They couldn't do anything right for the first, 3 quarters. And then all of a sudden, they just flipped the switch. They scored 40 points in the first half. They scored 40 points in the fourth quarter, which is crazy to think about. Embiid was great for the first 3 quarters, but after that, he was pretty bad, honestly, in the fourth quarter. Trae Young was bad for the first 3 quarters. He was really good for the fourth quarter. So it was a complete game of opposites, looking at it for the first 3 quarters and that last quarter. A crazy stat that I read was that Seth Curry and Joel Embiid were the only players on the Sixers to make a field goal for the entire second half. I mean, that's pretty crazy to think about. I know they only scored 44 points, but out of 44 points, they were the only people to make a field goal in the whole second half. I mean, that is just ridiculous to think about. Out of the 8 or 9 guys that they were playing, only 2 guys made a field goal. Just a crazy game. The Hawks came back and won, getting stops. The Sixers didn't make a field goal for the last 6 minutes of the game. They missed so many free throws down the stretch, especially Embiid, who had made 20 straight. I think they said he missed 2 straight when they were down 3, still with a chance to come back and win. Just an absolutely insane game. And the Hawks are, again, 1 win away from the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't think anyone would have expected that. What were your thoughts on Game 5?
Well, as far as the Sixers are concerned, Seth Curry had a great game. He had like 36 points. So first off, if he doesn't have that, then this game probably looks – then the Hawks may just blow him out. My phone's going off. I think you have to look at Joel Embiid. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He had a good stat line. He had like 37 points, rebounds, and assists. I don't even know what he had, but it was a good stat line just looking at the stats. But when you take a look at his performance down the stretch, it's horrible. And when your team's falling apart and you're choking a lead, you look to your best player and you say, all right, best player, rally the troops. Let's not give up a 25-point lead or whatever it was. And he didn't do that. He contributed to giving up that lead, reminiscent of, the Falcons, like 2015 Super Bowl, reminiscent to just a lot of these big choked leads where they don't have, a Michael Jordan or a Mamba mentality type of guy or a Brady or just one of these guys that's just gonna stop the game and take control of the game and tell the other team no when they're trying to take this big of a comeback. And Joel Embiid didn't do that, and maybe that separates him and not necessarily him and Kobe as players, but him and Kobe as far as mentality. Maybe Embiid just doesn't have that mentality. He doesn't have that leader mentality. I don't know. It's a horrible loss. The second person I look at is Rivers. I've talked about it, I feel like, on this podcast plenty. He finds a way to choke leads, and he finds a way to be a good, really, really good Rick Carlisle level, good regular season head coach, but almost similar to Carlisle. He doesn't win in the playoffs other than one championship. He just doesn't. I mean, and Rivers is the only coach to choke multiple 3-1 leads. He's done it 3 times. I can't believe it. I mean, everywhere he goes, I feel like the teams, they're 1 through 3 seeds. They look awesome. They've got a solid, top 3 players and a solid rest of your rotation. And then you play a team that is clearly an inferior team. I mean, the Hawks are clearly an inferior team. You could argue that Trae Young, I mean, he's probably the second best player in this series, but if you wanted to argue, he's maybe even the third. If you want to say, you probably wouldn't say right now that Simmons is better, but before you probably could have. And other than that, the Sixers have a much better roster after those guys too. So it's just, if you lose a series, I mean, I probably take a really long time to think about blowing it up. Not necessarily firing Rivers, but I don't know that Embiid and Simmons can win a championship.
Well, there's 2 things I'm going to say. And the first is that last point of, possibly blowing it up and firing Rivers. I mean, Daryl Morey is their GM, but he wasn't the guy who hired Doc Rivers. So that wasn't his guy. So he could easily fire him. They could keep the team and he could fire him. They could blow up the team and they could fire him. So I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they did lose this series. Let's say they lost, game 6. And Doc Rivers was fired because, again, Daryl Morey didn't hire him. He became the GM after he was hired. So I really wouldn't be surprised by that. Again, they could keep him. Again, I wouldn't be surprised by that either. But also, just looking at the other side of him being fired, and that's on his guy. But the second thing, and the guy I want to look at, is Ben Simmons. I mean, he wants to be treated like he's an all-star type player. And I think he's averaging like 10 points per game in the series. And he obviously cannot make a free throw. I think he was 4 of 14 last night. 4 of 14 from the foul line. And that was coming with making 2 in a row when he got fouled somewhat late in the game, I think with like 5 or 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. So he basically was 2 of 12 the rest of the game, which is just absolutely terrible. I don't know how you go 2 of 12 from the free throw line. I know he can't shoot the ball, but it's free throws. That should be something that you should be able to make at least at a 70% rate. I would say, for a guy who's 6'8", I mean, you'd think he'd be able to make that, or 6'10", you'd think he'd be able to make that for a guy who's been on the perimeter his entire career, going back to when he was like a kid. So that's just crazy. But again, he has to be more aggressive. He's taking 4 shots in this game. And I know they were up by 20 plus basically the entire game, but for him to take 4 shots and he wants to be treated like he's a, all-star player, potential superstar type player, which he's obviously just not, you have to take more than 4 shots in a game, in a playoff game. You're letting guys like Tobias Harris go 2 for 11, better than you. He had Tobias Harris shot 3 threes, so he basically outshot you just in 3-pointers. I mean, you just cannot let these guys take more shots than you. You have to be more aggressive. They don't really have anyone to guard Simmons if he wants to be aggressive because there's no DeAndre Hunter, like we were saying. That was probably their guy to guard him if Simmons was aggressive. Good Gallinari can't really guard you. You can't really put Onyeka Okongwu, who comes off their bench. You can't really put him on him, even though he's similar in size and speed. Not speed-wise, but obviously, but, more athletic, I'd say. So they don't really have anyone to guard him if he wanted to be aggressive. So I really look at Ben Simmons and say, if they lose this series, I can give Embiid somewhat of a pass because he has been pretty dominant in the series. Game 4 was bad when he went 0-12, but this game he was dominating. I think that you could look at Simmons and Doc Rivers for this loss, honestly. But Simmons for this entire series, and honestly for his future with this team, I think there's serious question marks. And again, they didn't want to give him up for Harden. And I know Harden's been injured, but let's say Harden stays healthy. This is definitely is not happening, and they're probably past the Hawks by now, honestly.
I don't disagree. I'm a Simmons guy. I like Simmons, but it's horrible. I mean, he needs to shoot the ball. He could be worse. I just
Like, wouldn't you rather have him be like 4 of 15 from the field, but at least he's trying to shoot the ball, he's being aggressive, than be 2 of 4 from the field and 4 of 14 from the free throw line? Is he just scared of going to the free throw line? Maybe that's why he's not wanting to be aggressive.
I mean, he realizes that he can't shoot the ball and he realizes he can't make free throws. Teams are more than happy to foul him. They're not, I mean, they're not gonna just go out of their way to foul him, I guess, but they're gonna, I mean, in a way they are going out of the way to foul him. And it's horrible. I mean, I've heard, all these, Ben Simmons takes that are just, to me, just stupid, saying you'd rather have, garbage point guards over him at this point. People said that, but they're looking right in a certain way this playoff series. The fact that Ben Simmons is, I mean, he's a guard that can't shoot. You can't have that in the NBA anymore. You just can't. And you really never could have that in the NBA, but especially in 2021, a guard that won't shoot the ball, can't shoot the ball, shoots 50% from the free throw line at pretty much at best almost. You just can't have it. You can't have it. And I don't know what his trade value is. It's still probably pretty significant, but definitely not as good. You're not going to get Harden for him anymore. I mean, obviously, can you, if Lillard wants to leave, which I don't think he wants to, but could you build a package around Simmons for Lillard? Sure. But you're going to have to be adding more than you would now than you would have had to for Harden, just a year ago today or whatever, how many days ago. So it's unfortunate. I almost want the Hawks to win this series because I want to see what happens to the to the 76ers. Does Rivers return? Does Simmons get dealt? Is Embiid happy with the Sixers organization? Does he want, not necessarily out, but what does he want to happen? What happens to this team? I have no clue what happens to this team if they lose a series. Because to me, I don't think you can justify running it back again. You've run it back too many times. You kept Brett Brown as your head coach way too many years than you should have. That's on the Sixers organization, 100%. You're wasting too many years, in my opinion. If you lose to the Hawks in 6 or even 7, if you choose to run it back with the same core, which is Embiid, Simmons, and if you want to throw Tobias Harris in that equation, you can. It's too many. You don't even have to blow it up, but you have to make significant changes again. Whether it's and the head coach, I don't think is enough. Firing Rivers would not be enough to me. It really wouldn't.
Yeah, and they're somewhat out of moves, honestly. I think Simmons is their last move, and the way he's been playing, I think, would deter some teams from wanting to get him. And again, you'd have to be getting a Lillard in return for this team to be still a championship level team. So they are somewhat out of moves, honestly. And again, I don't think firing a coach is good enough because I think we saw, and again, they still may win the series. Again, there's still game 6 and game 7. And I think they are the more talented team. But it's just going to be a lot of questions if they do lose game 6 or even if they lose game 7.
Even if they lose in the conference finals, there's still going to be a lot of questions. Unless it's to a fully healthy Nets.
What'd you say?
Unless it's to a fully healthy Nets, there's still going to be questions for me.
But I think and again, we don't know about Kyrie Irving and if he can come back or what, but if they were to make the conference finals and lose, it definitely would look worse because it's not a fully healthy Nets team, but I think the Nets are still probably the better team, honestly. So I think there'd still be questions, but I think there'd be less questions than you losing to the Hawks in the second round of the playoffs when you're up. You're up 2-1 in the series, and you have a terrible game 4 and you have a terrible game 5 on your home court. I think there's way more questions there. I think you would agree with that also. But a loss in the Eastern Conference Finals to an unhealthy Nets team, I think, would look bad, but just not this bad, I would say.
No, I 100% agree. Even losing to the Bucks, who, if the Bucks make it somehow, which I think they still can, even if losing to the Bucks, I still think there's questions because you are the 1 seed. You're supposed to go to the finals, right? And obviously that's not how it plays out the majority of the time, just because that's how the odds are. But still, this team should be doing way better than they are right now. And I know if you watch the podcast last episode, or if you watch the clip about Damian Lillard, I know you said, you don't trade Joel Embiid, but if Simmons isn't getting you much, and I think you have to look to trade Simmons first, probably, and that's if they lose a series. But could you still look to trading Joel Embiid? I think you can. I really think you can, depending on the package. And I'm not going to trade him just to trade him. But if I can get a good package for a guy who, yeah, he's dominant, but he's a guy that, I mean, it's not surprising me if he gets injured next year and misses time, and it's just too much of a gamble, and you've already wasted so many years. And if I can blow it up and get, I don't know what a package would be, but if I can get a package that sets me up for the future, I have to consider it, because I genuinely don't think you can win a championship as of right now with Simmons playing how he is with this core. There's no way.
Well, you wouldn't if you were going to trade Embiid, it would not be after this season. If you were going to do it, it'd be after next season. So you at least give it another chance, whether it's with Simmons or not with Simmons, if you do trade him or whatever. Because Embiid's the best center in basketball. I know Jokic won MVP, but Embiid is the best center in basketball. It's really not a question, at least in my mind. So you don't just trade him, because look, if you have Embiid on your team, they still have a good team around them. That they are a championship level type team. So you wouldn't do that yet, but if they were to lose, to the Hawks in Game 6 or Game 7, they were to lose next year. If they face the Bucks or they face the Nets, maybe if a Celtics get rejuvenated or a Heat gets rejuvenated again, they lose in the second round or conference finals again. I could definitely see them trading Embiid at that point, because again, he is injury prone. He would be older. I think he'd be, I want to say he's like 27 right now, 26. So, he'd be getting towards that early 30, getting towards the early 30s. But again, for him, that kind of is like his early 30s, because he's just been so injured and his body's definitely worn down so much. So I could see it at the end of next season if they were to lose, but not the end of this season. I think that'd be, unless they really wanted to blow things up. But again, you do have a championship level type team, so I don't think you'd want to do that just yet. But I guess it's still a possibility. I just think it'd be the wrong move and the complete wrong decision. But that was it for those Game 5s. But another Game 5 that happened the night before, again, another great game. Bucks Nets, and we'll talk quickly on this, and then we'll get into their Game 6. Kind of just make predictions on it, honestly. But Kevin Durant, that's honestly the storyline of that game. It's the only storyline of that game. He played all 48 minutes, scored 49 points. 17 rebounds, 10 assists, had a triple-double. Didn't even really realize he didn't come out. I watched that game. I didn't even really realize he didn't come out, honestly, until like the end, where it's like, they kind of mentioned it. And it's like, wow, he really hasn't come out of this game yet. And, you just think about that, a guy coming off a torn Achilles who's, in his 30s, had a lot of wear and tear on that body. You just don't, you already have Harden injured. I know he played, but he was terrible in Game 5. And he really shouldn't be playing. Kyrie's injured, so you can't risk KD getting injured. So for him to play all 48 minutes, the performance that he had, the three that he had at the end of the shot clock, a terrible possession by the Nets on that. Harden just held the ball for 23 seconds and then just gave it to KD, and he chucked up a three. The shots he was making, the defense that they were having on the other end, just a really good game by the Nets. I know they were down big early, but they kept fighting and fighting. Joe Harris was terrible again. He needs to step it up in the series, and really, honestly, for the East Finals is what I'm really talking about. But just Kevin Durant, just an amazing performance. What were your thoughts on just honestly an all-time performance? I know it was the second round, but that was an all-time performance.
If the Nets win the series, and probably I don't know if they have to win the finals or not, but if the Nets win this series, that's probably the best performance by KD he's ever had. That actually meant something, that actually means something. It's the LeBron Game 6 against the Celtics. It's the LeBron Game 7 against the Warriors in the 2016 NBA Finals. It's one of those types of games. I mean, back against the wall. Are you going to do it? Or are you going to not do it? Are you the best player in the world? And, LeBron, those are games where he flourishes and he proved that he's the best player in the world. And I think that's pretty much what KD did. If you had any questions about it, at least right now at this moment, who's the best player in the world right now? It's KD. I mean, I'm sorry, but LeBron's not winning that game if he was on the Nets right now, and he's not winning that game 5. He's not. He's just not. I'm sorry. It's an unbelievable performance. I guess it kind of sucks he missed that free throw at the end. He didn't get 50, but
Yeah.
I mean, 49 is, still plenty good, obviously. The Nets still need to win game 6 or game 7. I'm not gonna start getting into is Durant better than X player all time. The Nets still need to win the finals for me to really be in love with KD. But I think right now he's the best player in the world. I'd like to see them win the finals. I think that even with an injured Kyrie and injured Harden, if you can just get one of them back at, we'll call it 75%, this team should still win the finals, in my opinion, especially with the injuries around the league we've seen. With, every team pretty much. So, yeah, unbelievable performance. We'll see how the Bucks respond. I don't know. Is Giannis, really game 5, Giannis didn't even look like a top 20 player compared to what KD did that night. Not that he's not a top 20 player. I'm just saying he couldn't hold a candle to that. It was insane.
Well, I think this comes back to the point that I made. I think it was game 2 or maybe game 1 of this series, where Giannis he can't have the ball at the end of the game, and we saw in this game he had Harden on a post up towards the end of the game where they were struggling to get points, and the Nets were coming back. I don't exactly know what the score was, but he had Harden on a post up 1-on-1. Harden waved off the double team, so he was going to go 1-on-1. And you take a turnaround jump shot that he obviously bricked. He obviously wasn't going to make that. He could have just taken him to the hole. Harden can't move defensively. He's literally playing on like a torn hamstring. So I don't know why you aren't just driving and having him foul you, or you just get an easy layup or a dunk. Obviously, you're Giannis. So just bad decision making from him down the stretch. He obviously had the turnover where you're still in the game. Middleton makes a great play to get KD off him. He dumps it off to Giannis for a wide open dunk. I don't know if he was scared of being fouled, kind of like Ben Simmons, where he just was trying to go so quick. So if he did get fouled, he's at least making the dunk, and he's not just getting completely hacked, or he just dropped the ball. I don't know, but that was terrible turnover. And you just see time and time again, he just can't have the ball at the end of the game. He can ball handle and he can pass, but he can't shoot. If they foul him, he's at the most making 1 out of 2 from the free throw line. So just serious questions with them. Like I was saying earlier, Budenholzer, he's definitely on the hot seat. I'd say if they lose this game, I know they were down 2-0. It's the Nets, but no Harden, no Kyrie. You tie it 2-2. You're up by, I think they're up 20 points or 18 points in this game. Just really bad loss, terrible loss. And I do think they lose. If they don't lose game 6, I think they lose game 7. I think they lose this series. I don't think you can lose a game like that and then win the series, honestly. So, and Harden's obviously going to play better than he played. He scored
5 points,
5 points, 1 of 10 from the field, 0 of 8 from 3. He's not going to be that bad. He'll probably be pretty bad, but he won't be that bad. So yeah, I think this series is over, which kind of leads us into game 6, where I know I just said game 6 or game 7. I'm going to say they win tonight, game 6. The game's literally about to start happening. I think it happens in like 30 minutes, but I'm going to say Nets win in Milwaukee. I think KD has another big game. I think Harden's decent. Joe Harris is better. I think he has a really good night from 3. And I think the Nets win.
I will say, I think Budenholzer is fired if they lose a series. And I would fire Budenholzer if I lose a series as the Bucks. Maybe he's not fired, but if I was the Bucks owner / GM, I'm firing Budenholzer on the spot. This is your best chance to get to the conference finals than you will have in the next however many years, because the Brooklyn Nets aren't going to have 2 of their 3 best players injured again, or you can't predict that at least. This is their best chance. If Budenholzer doesn't get it done now, he's not getting it done in the future. I'd fire him. So, yeah, but yeah.
So who do you have? You have the Nets winning this game?
I have the Bucks winning this game. I think I have the Bucks winning this game. They're at home. I still think they're a relatively resilient team. I think Giannis is a resilient guy, and he's the leader of that team. I think they win. I want to predict the Bucks to win game 7, but I'll hold off on a game 7 prediction just because we still have to see game 6. But I'll take the Bucks in game 6.
All right. So Drew has Bucks. I have Nets. But that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Unless you
I
have
thought you said the
anything
Bucks would
else.
win game 6.
No, I said Nets would win Game 6.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. But that's it for this episode. Like I said, that game's about to start, so we'll see who's right after as soon as this episode kind of goes up. But yeah, just a lot of news in the NBA, coaches, players, injuries, COVID, all-time performances, just everything. All-season questions. So yeah, that's probably gonna wrap it up for this episode, though.
Yeah, appreciate everybody stay to the end. Feel free to check out everything in the description. We've been uploading to the Clips channel more often. Feel free to check it out. There's content that is featured on this podcast. There's also content that we create specifically for that. So feel free to check it out, reactions, etc. Social medias and all that in the description. We'll be back in the next few days.